Welcome to the Get Published podcast, sponsored by Brodie Consulting Group. To get more information about our publishing and coaching services, go to getpublishedpodcast.com. Hello, I am Paul Brodie, and thank you for joining us for another episode of the Get Published podcast, where we help authors get published with a proven system that works. Today, we're being joined by Jody B. author of From Drift to Shift. Jody, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Paul. I love talking to audiences about writing, and I'm happy to be here with you today.
Excellent. Are you ready to get started?
Sure.
All right. Question number 1. What is the one piece of advice that you would give to a first-time author who is currently writing their book?
Wow, that's a tough one because I was a first-time author, and often we stare at that blank page, and there's a lot of self-doubt. Is anyone going to want to read this? But just so first-time authors know, there are a lot of very famous authors who go through this same experience. Anne Lamott is someone that I know that lives near me, and she always says she looks at that blank page and looks at a little 1-inch picture frame that's on her desk of her son, and she tells herself, inch by inch, I'm going to write this new book. So everyone has doubts. So one piece of advice I'd have is to get over the doubting and start working. And in terms of a practical way to get you excited about your writing is to read, listen. And the reason why I say that, and not just if you're writing nonfiction, read nonfiction, or if you're writing fiction, read different kinds of things. Like I just finished Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy, and I loved the way he wrote. So I took notes on phrases just to remind me of different metaphors and different ways of thinking of things. And so the more you read and the more you listen to audiobooks, the better of a writer you will become. That's my best piece of advice.
Well, and that's great advice because from my understanding when we were talking prior to the show, you've actually written several books now.
I have. Drift to Shift is my most recent. The Misogi Method will be coming out early next year. I'm working on my second novel. I've written 2 books about finding what you're meant to do in life called Hired. And I have another book, Hired for Employers. So I do a lot of work-life happiness on the nonfiction side. And on the fiction side, I've written 1 novel, and then my second novel is about a third of the way through.
Well, and then the Misogi Method, that is the one that you actually did a TED Talk on and also have a podcast, correct?
That's right. I did a TEDx talk earlier this year in Dallas, and the theme was called Tabula Rasa, which means blank slate, and that fit really well with my theme of Misogis. And without going into full detail, you can look it up, look up Jody B. Step Outside Your Comfort Zone, TEDx talk, and I think I'm up to, maybe 400,000 views, maybe a little more than that since March. Actually, they didn't release it until May, so since May. So I'm really excited about that. And I started the podcast right after. I have about 20 episodes up. It's called The Misogi Method, and you'll learn a lot about what a misogi is and how you can apply it to your life and how people have done that to really break through barriers to achieve happiness, meaning, and success that lasts in their lives. And it's really, really fun. I have a great time, just like you do, right, Paul, with your podcast?
It is a lot of fun because my philosophy is if you're not having fun with it, you shouldn't be doing it.
Definitely. So true.
So yeah, this is one of my favorite parts of the day. We budget certain amount of time every day to do the podcast shows, and I have a lot of fun with it because we just have great conversations. That's the whole point of the show, and just learning, and most importantly, giving that value to our listeners.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely.
And that is actually going to transition really nicely into our next question, and that is, what do you feel is the hardest part about getting published?
Well, if you're a first-time author, it can be really hard or it can be easy. I mean, if you look at Jack Canfield, who wrote Chicken Soup for the Soul, right, or all the Chicken Soup books, he self-published his first book, and he lives in Santa Barbara, where I spend half my time, and he's very, very successful and talks about writing all over the world, and he's self-published. So don't be discouraged if you get 20, 30, 40 rejections. I did, but you eventually will find a publisher. The hardest part is having the strength to keep going and not give up. So, and also, again, self-publishing is a way to go. So don't negate that, because the platforms are really very user-friendly. You can hire someone to format your book. You can hire an editor. I would recommend that regardless, even if you're with a publisher like I have been with Drift to Shift, but and my novel as well. But you still want to hire your own editor before you ever submit the manuscript. So just don't get discouraged. It's a tough business, but you can always self-publish your first book and go, wow, that's my book, and that will get you really, really excited. So don't be too discouraged. And then another tip on sort of fast tracking is to go to writing conferences. That's how I got the publisher for my last book, and I have interest in my novel right now from 2 major publishers because I went to the pitch session at a writing conference. So consider writing conferences. It's a really good way to be with like-minded writers, to listen to successful writers and publishers, and to meet them face-to-face as well as agents and pitch your idea. So that's just a little bit of advice to sort of fast-track your way if you're feeling discouraged.
So you're mentioning going to writing conferences to learn about how to pitch your book, or actually pitching your book at the conference?
Yes, pitch your book, but you'll learn a lot by the breakouts. You'll learn from publishers, agents, you'll learn from successful writers, you'll learn from people like you that have systems that help people get published, and you're also around other writers, so you get this real good feeling of like, I'm with my tribe, and you get excited, and you never know who you're going to meet. And so it's really, really fun. I'm a big fan of conferences and the connections that you make when you go.
Well, you mentioned you went through a traditional publisher, so if you don't mind me asking, which publisher did you go with?
Well, I went with a small one in San Francisco for my novel called TMG Books. It was just a very small outfit because it was my first book. And just to also let your first-time authors know, publishers don't do a lot for you nowadays, even the big ones. Like I'm talking to Random House right now, or Penguin, or whatever they're all combined as right now. And for my second novel, and even the big publishers don't do a lot for you. You have to do a lot of your own marketing. So don't be discouraged about that, but know that you do have to do a lot of your own marketing along the way.
Yeah, I think with the exception of Penguin and Random, just about every other publisher, they expect you to do the lion's share. And I think that's the biggest eye-opener, even people that are going through the traditional route, is that you still have to do most, if not all, the marketing.
Well, I will tell you, I have a cousin. I don't want to mention his name because I could tell you who he is, but he's very, very well known. He's a thriller writer, and if you go into any bookstore, any airport around the world, I see his books. I was in Bangkok, and I saw one of his books last year. He's with a major publisher, and he still does a ton of his own marketing. Mm-hmm. So even the very successful writers that get $1 million a book before they even write it still have to do a lot of their own marketing. Maybe not the book tour piece, but still a lot of the ongoing visibility, for sure.
Well, and this transitions perfectly into our next question, and that is to please share a marketing strategy that you have used in your book launch that worked well.
Sure. I'll tell you one from fiction and one from nonfiction because I write both, and I love both. And I'm sort of like right in the middle. I'm sort of both a left and right brain kind of person. So the fiction is sort of letting my imagination take over, and it's really fun. And the nonfiction is very applicable to what I do for work. And so I'm always around big companies and CEOs, and I'm good at what I do. So it makes sense for me to write more about that too, and it's fun. But for my novel, what I did, and again, remember I had the small publisher in San Francisco that didn't really do anything for me except get me in bookstores. That's primarily all they do, most of them. I did a virtual tour. Consider that if you're a first-time author, because when you do a virtual tour, you are invited to be interviewed on people's blogs, people's podcasts. Your book is highlighted. They set up sort of like a real tour, and people can come do Q&A with you. You do guest articles. I was on the first page of Google within about 10 days of this, and I did it for, I think it was about a 15-day tour, and I was busy. I was very committed to this, and I was all of a sudden showing up on the first page of Google. So a virtual tour is not a bad idea. In fact, it really launched my book, and I sold a lot of copies of No Time for Love. So that's one idea that you could do. For my latest book, Drift to Shift, which is nonfiction, I went with a bigger publisher for that book. I hired a publicity firm, again, because the publisher really just gets you in bookstores. So for everything else, I hired a publicity firm, and there are lots of them, and I researched quite a bit, and I chose one that fit with me, and I got along well with the team, and they're expensive. So you have to really decide you're going to invest in you. But it paid off for me. Drift to Shift became a top seller, and this publicity firm got me interviewed on television, every major network, radio, a gazillion podcasts all over the world. I write now for Entrepreneur Magazine, HuffPost, CEO Magazine. I write regularly for Thrive Global. They put together my press kit. They did monthly pitches for me, sometimes twice a month, and we'd come up with ideas that were a take from my book but expanded it. And then I'd be invited to write about that, or I'd be interviewed by someone from one of the networks, and then they'd put that on all of their station websites. So again, I just jumped to the first page. And then the TEDx talk was sort of came out of that too. It's really an extension of Drift to Shift, and I was encouraged to apply, and I applied to, I think, 7 of them, and I got the one I really wanted. I got the one in Dallas, and then I was asked, and I've actually been asked to do 2 more since I did the one in March, but I have turned them down because I'm working on my other novel and the Misogi Method book. So again, a publicity firm if you're ready. I think if it's your first book, maybe not. And again, virtual tours are a real cool way to go.
Well, one thing I'd like to ask you a little bit more about is in regards to the TED Talk. So what advice would you give to our listeners on how to apply to be on a TED Talk, and the process, and any tips and tricks that you would recommend?
Sure. If you go to MisogiRadio.com, that's my podcast sort of website, so you can read and see pictures of my guests, and that will link you to iTunes, to each episode. One of my guests is a coach, a TEDx coach, who also put on an event, and he has coached, I think he's up to, he might have said on that episode 20 TEDx speakers, but I think he's up to like 40. And he talks all about the process, but having gone through it, really it's, you want to find what fits your idea we're sharing, and your idea has to have a big aha moment in it. So it can't just be a bunch of slides. In fact, no slides is better. That's a tip. And you want to find the venue that fits with you, whatever that idea you have, that big idea you have we're sharing. Watch a lot of TED Talks. Watch a lot of TEDx Talks. You'll see the format. You'll start to get a feel for what it's like. There's a book you can buy, and I'm not sitting at my desk, but it's like Talk Like TED, something like that. I think I wrote a blog about it, so you could go to jodybmiller.com and go through my blogs, and I'm pretty sure I wrote a blog about the book. So find the TEDx venue that fits, make sure it fits with your schedule. If you go to TED.com, you can search any TEDx event anywhere in the world and apply. You have to dig a little time sometimes to find the organizers, and once you apply, then you have to do an interview. And I did a phone interview, I did a video interview, I had to deliver part of my speech, I had to send an outline. So once you're committed, it's pretty involved. There's a rehearsal, and then I'd recommend getting a coach. Some venues will assign you a coach. My venue asked me if I needed a coach, and I didn't, because I have a personal speaking coach, because I speak all over the world about work happiness. And so I had my own coach, so I didn't need it. But if they offer you one, take them up on it. And otherwise, you might want to hire your own before you apply, because they'll help you hone your idea and get accepted.
That is great advice. Thank you so much for sharing that, because one of the questions that I get often is about TED Talks. So I'm really glad that you're able to expand on that, and I appreciate you sharing that with our audience.
Yeah, and just to clarify, Paul, getting a TED Talk is almost impossible unless you're Bill Gates or the Dalai Lama. Mm-hmm. But TEDx are the independently organized. So TEDx is really what you want to go for. And then in terms of TEDx, they have different levels, like TEDx University, TEDx Salon. Go for a main TEDx. I was in a main one in a big venue with a lot of people. Try and get a main, I think it's called standard. The salons are tiny. The university ones are mostly like college and university people, try and get a standard TEDx. That would be my other piece of advice if you're going to go for one.
Great. So I appreciate you sharing that. And let's talk a little bit about your favorite book. So what is your favorite book, and what was the number one thing that you learned from it?
I love that question. That's a great question. I actually have two favorite books. One is many people's favorite book, The Giving Tree by Shel Silverstein.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I give it, in fact, to every friend I've ever had that's had a baby. That's a gift that I give. And I read it to my children. I have 3 kids. And it's all about unconditional love. And I think when we live life that way, we will always find happiness. And as I said, I speak a lot about happiness in work and life all over the world. And that book is, to me, the epitome of unconditional love, selfless love. So I love that book. And then another book that you've probably never heard of. In fact, I still haven't been able to find it since I've been a kid. And my mom has tried to help find it too. It was published by Buster Brown Shoes. And it was a story that was told in verse. And I actually memorized it. I'm not going to say it for you today, but I memorized this book, and I've always wanted to find it. And what it did for me was launched my love of writing, and writing poetry and songs is how I started out. Many years ago, I won a poetry contest. I had a song that was on the radio. And so it was really because of this Buster Brown book that launched my interest in writing. So read, people. Read, because you never know where that's going to take you. It may change your idea for your book. It may add to your book. It may inspire you to go in a different kind of writing. You may decide to write in first person versus third person. So the more you read, the more you get inspired. And look at me. I read this little Buster Brown book, and I said, I think I'm going to be a writer at some point. So that's what it did for me.
And for a final question, what is your favorite quote and why?
My favorite quote is a quote that's on my signature, on my email, and it's a quote by Steve Jobs. The only way to do great work is to do what you love. And I live that life. That's how I live. That's how I encourage everyone else to live when I'm in corporate America speaking or doing workshops or at conferences. If you don't do what you love, you're just not going to find happiness, and we all want happiness in life. So don't follow the money. Follow your passion. The money will come. So that's my favorite quote.
Yeah, that's my philosophy. If you're not having fun, you shouldn't be doing it.
That's right. Awesome.
Well, Jody, I want to thank you for being a guest on the show. What is the best way for people to find you online?
Oh, thanks for asking, Paul. People can go to jodybmiller.com. That's Jody with a Y and B as in Barry. So jodybmiller.com. You can get links to my books, my podcast. I do a monthly newsletter if you're in the corporate world. And you can look at my workshops and when I'm speaking and see my Facebook and link to all that stuff too. So jodybmiller.com.
Well, Jody, thank you once again for being a guest on the show, and I wish you all the best in your author journey ahead.
Thank you so much, Paul. Thank you very much for inviting me. I had a great, great time.
Thanks again for joining us today. To learn more about how to get your book published with a proven system that works, grab a free copy of my book at getpublishedpodcast.com.